I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough, irritating, gets everywhere, and on top of that, transforms entire populations into horrific monsters that want to rip me to shreds. So yeah, fuck sand. Not long before Ubisoft began assaulting everyone's bank accounts with annual Assassin's Creed titles with varying quality, they actually did shit with the series that paved the way for their unstoppable behemoth of a game franchise. Prince of Persia started out as a DOS game from 1989. The game was one of the earlier examples of a cinematic platformer and pretty influential for many other games later down the line, both 2D and 3D. The game got a sequel and then stopped, but many years down the line, the series would go into the realm of 3D and become quite successful. After a previous attempt to go 3D, which apparently really sucked. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time came out in 2003 for every relevant system from the time, and later got an HD remaster on the PS3 in 2010. And yeah, it's basically the game everyone immediately thinks of when Prince of Persia is brought up. So it probably goes without saying that I myself have a lot to say about the game. The footage I'm using for this review comes from the Steam version of this game, though my introduction to the franchise actually came from the PS3 HD collection. I'll go more into depth about this later on, but all I'll say for now is avoid this version! Right then, let's begin with the review. Our story centers around the main character of the Prince of Persia saga, the Prince of Persia. His real name never actually gets revealed, so for all I know, he could be named Billy Bob Joe Daniels Esquire III. PhD. Anyways, the game begins with the prince, his father, and the Persian army passing through India on their way to the palace of Azad. Of course, not without the army attacking the kingdom, these are the Persians after all, instigated by the vizier, and the prince being part of said attack. After briefly taking part in the battle, the prince instead decides to play his part by raiding the Maharaja's treasure vault. It's here that the prince uncovers the Dagger of Time, an artifact with the ability to rewind time to a certain point as long as it contains sand. Speaking of which, an hourglass containing a magical substance known as the Sands of Time is also uncovered and taken as a gift to the Sultan of Azad, along with a bunch of women including the Maharaja's daughter, Farah. As it turns out, the vizier was actually a bad guy all along! Who the hell could have guessed that with this face? He looks so charming and friendly. The vizier's plan is to unleash the Sands of Time to give himself eternal life and avoid succumbing to his illness. It's never quite specified what he's sick with, but it must be pretty bad if he's coughing up blood. I mean, that's how I typically feel when I watch a Logan Paul video. The vizier instructs the prince to insert the dagger into the hourglass, which causes shit to go down fast as everyone except for them and Farah are transformed into horrific monsters. Well, them and also some random guard that you come across, but he doesn't last very long. He'll be okay. The main conflict of the game revolves around the prince and Farah making their way through Azad to reach the hourglass and undo the catastrophe while fighting off the monsters spawned from the sands being unleashed. It's not a very plot-heavy narrative, as normal cutscenes only really play around the beginning and near the end. It's a simple conflict, but it's more or less there to serve as a vehicle for the development of the characters and their relationship. The prince and Farah start out pretty much hating each other, with their kingdoms having been at each other's throats, as well as both having yet to mature. Though since they're the only ones spared from the sands aside from the villain, they pretty much have to suck it up and work together to make it out alive. Over time, they do become more fond and trusting, eventually growing romantic feelings toward one another. Much of their growth is conveyed through in-game dialogue, with the narration, character interaction, and the prince humorously rambling to himself. The player being put into the shoes of the prince, with puzzles and combat oftentimes serving to advance his relationship with Farah, helps to really make the player feel these characters growing. Not to say the plot being carried more through cutscenes would have been a detriment, but the game keeping them at a minimum and dedicating time in-game to the characters without disrupting the pacing is very well done and something you just don't see very often. The voice acting for the characters is spot on, special mention going to Yuri Lowenthal's performance, giving the prince a demeanor that's sophisticated dated yet spoiled and immature. The whole story is told through narration from the prince's point of view to the extent that it incorporates pauses and save points as interruptions to the narrative. Even deaths on the player's part are treated as the prince tripping up and starting again, which is pretty damn funny when you screw up multiple times on the same part and he messes up each time.
That didn't happen. No, wait. That's not right. That's not how it happened.
You're fucking terrible at this. By the way, I'll be talking about the game's ending, so if you want to avoid spoilers, skip to this part of the video. Okay, let's continue. Throughout the game, I just assumed the narration was there as the prince telling a bedtime story to a child or something like that. The revelation that it was told to Farah the whole time as a warning is a really clever way to bring the whole game full circle. Also, the way that the prince convinces her all of the game's events actually happened for real was a great, if bittersweet, way to conclude the game. Oh yeah, and you do kill the vizier. Thought I'd mention that.
And so it ends. How will the Maharaja feel when he finds his only daughter slain by the son of his enemy?
Pardon me, sir, but need I remind you who the person backed into a corner is? Exactly, idiot. A couple moments of the story I found a bit questionable, like the prince immediately getting over his father's horrific transformation and death, and all the hints that Farah's going to take the Dagger of Time, which she does along with your sword for reasons I don't know actually. It doesn't really add anything, and I question why it's even in the plot to begin with. Though in the end, they're just nitpicks that you can easily ignore. They do nothing to detract from the game's charming and unique narrative, which, surprising for a story centered around time, no plot holes stuck out as jarring if there are any to be found. Even if separated from the games to follow, Sands of Time stands strongly as its own self-contained narrative. Despite being around 15 years old, this game looks pretty damn great, and time has been very kind to the visuals, pun not intended. Even with this version not being in HD, it's still a beautiful game. The visual style is sort of a mixture of realism and fantasy, with the way everything is structured looking similar to life, while movement tends to look more exaggerated, which fits well with the game's setting of a more mythical version of Persia. The level of detail for 2003 is outstanding, and for the game to make a desert-like setting that's not bland as shit, bravo! Helping out is the presence of water and vegetation serving as a beautiful contrast to the typical golden brown that you see throughout the environment. The usage of particle effects, namely the almost fog-like clouds of sand, make the environment look more interesting, while at the same time bringing in an atmosphere that's empty and apocalyptic in a way. Characters show a wide variety of emotions just from facial animation, and in-game animations make each action you perform just as fun to watch as it is to play. Bit odd that the prince does the put dagger away animation before he's even wielding it though. You, okay there? The pre-rendered cutscenes comparatively look pretty stiff, not helping that the game is from a time when the difference between pre-rendered and in-game cutscenes was especially jarring as hell, but that's about all I've got to say for negatives about the visuals. It looks great, performs flawlessly on my PC, and loading times are practically instant. Sound also plays a major role in this game. With the in-game dialogue being a major focus, the game effectively manages to differentiate the narration from talking within the story, with subtle differences in volume levels and the narration sounding more clear and less echoey. The overall sound design is pretty solid, with the game making use of recognizable audio cues that clue you in on nearby items or grab your attention when danger is close. Much of the game has no music playing at all, which is very helpful in allowing the player to take in the beautiful scenery, concentrate on a puzzle, and let the player hear the prince and Farah's dialogue without it being drowned out by some fucker's poor audio balancing job. Though when you get into combat, music combining elements of rock, Middle Eastern, and Indian instrumentals can be heard, which not only fit in with the location and current mood, but get you seriously pumped to fight. Following the praise I've given towards Sands of Time's presentation, here's how the PS3 version takes every bit of it and completely fucks it up. To be fair, this version does improve the game's textures. And that's it. Not only does the HD version somehow manage to make the character models look fucking hideous, but the overall game just performs worse. The frame rate is crap, and entering a new area always causes the game to stutter, making me paranoid over whether or not my game froze. Would have thought that a more powerful system like the PS3 would have been able to do better than this, but I guess joke's on me. Also, the sound quality is completely butchered. Music and sound effect audio is obnoxiously loud, along with every sound effect being audibly worse and giving off some ugly echo. To make things worse, the dialogue volume is so low even when you set it to maximum and turn down everything else. Everything a character says gets drowned out, so you can never understand what the hell anyone is even saying. And yeah, considering that this is a game that bases a lot of the character development around in-game dialogue, pretty big problem. The entire HD trilogy has these problems to a point, but Sands of Time has it the worst, hands down. Just avoid the HD port at all costs. It is horrendous. Terrible port aside, Sands of Time is exceptional from a technical standpoint. There are times when character dialogue volume can be a bit inconsistent, but compared to the other version I've played, I think I'd take that over bad quality audio that makes me want to go deaf. Sands of Time is a third-person platformer combined with action and puzzles. As you make your way through the Palace of Azad, you'll be doing a fair share of climbing, avoiding traps, working your way around roadblocks, and fighting to stay alive. Much of the platforming in this title revolves around crossing large gaps by jumping or wall running, climbing and shimmying across crevices in the wall, swinging on poles and ropes, and wall jumping to either reach greater heights or slow your descent to not break your legs and, well, every other bone in your body. Nobody wants this. The game can be a bit picky about whether it registers you running up or across the wall if you don't approach it perfectly, but thankfully that issue isn't too intrusive or hard to avoid. The control you have over the prince feels really fucking good. Movement is smooth and commands are responsive, even if it can be a bit of a pain to figure out how to change the prince's position on a pole, or get him to shimmy the direction you want. Also, in both versions I've played, the camera tends to be really uncooperative. It gets stuck on everything, angle changes often screw you over when going a different direction, and it almost seems to have a mind of its own. Going into the PC version, I initially had skepticism about how it would play since it had no default controller support and I was stuck with using a mouse and a keyboard. Thankfully though, it still plays really well with this control scheme, even if I do still prefer using a controller for a game like this. It starts off simple, letting you get a grasp on the wide assortment of platforming and parkour mechanics while gradually building onto it as you go through the game. It helps that the level design is really clever, always finding new ways to utilize these abilities, many times one after the other. If you've played more modern titles heavily centered around climbing and free running, this will likely feel familiar, though Sands of Time is more focused on slow pace and pre-planning as opposed to a game like Uncharted placing focus on adrenaline and over-the-top action. On your journey, you'll be subjected to many pleasant encounters from saw blades, rotating sword blades, pressure-sensitive spikes, these things. Yeah, a palace needs security, but when you take the time to construct giant wall scissors, the line between palace and murder castle gets more blurry than my eyesight without glasses or contacts. Considering how the game is built, there is a pretty strong chance you'll either get sliced in half by traps or break every bone in your body when falling hundreds of feet on your first few attempts. Thankfully, the Dagger of Time grants you the ability to rewind to a certain point and undo your mistake. There's a finite amount of times that you can do this depending on how much sand is stored into it, but sand is pretty easy to find and you'll quickly add more and more sand tanks to your dagger throughout the game, so your dagger theoretically should be pretty full of it whenever you may need to use it. By the way, puzzles are also a thing. A good majority consist of activating a button or switch to open a door, but each instance provides a more nuanced approach, and the bigger puzzles really stand out as some of the game's more clever design choices. So far, I've been really positive toward this game for good reason. It's great! It's goddamn incredible! But now it's time for me to go over what I'd say is the weakest aspect of Sands of Time. The combat. Don't get me wrong, the combat isn't bad per se. It's a simple but effective system of attacking, blocking, and dodging, implemented very strategically with you needing to always make the right move at the right time. Hell, there's a number of moments where the combat aspect is just as fun as the rest of the game, but those moments, 9 times out of 10, are always countered by these sequences dragging out for way too long. Most of the time, without fail, whenever you take care of one wave of enemies, another comes along after just the right amount of time to make me paranoid about whether my game broke or something. In such cases, the scenario plays out either with me slogging through with no trouble at all, or the enemies kicking my ass, not from fair challenge, but being worn down by the ridiculous number that keep coming in. I always dread the elevator sequence in particular, since you're trapped in a very small space with a pretty vulnerable AI partner, while being relentlessly assaulted by some of the more powerful enemies in the game that never stop spawning.
Where are they coming from?
That is a very good question, Farah. The game has a couple of boss fights, but they're nothing really that special. The fight with your father gives me violent thoughts. Same issue as before with enemies endlessly spawning in with no way to tell when they'll stop. They beat you and Farah down brutally, and after somehow clearing them out, it's just a boring wait for the boss to attack so you can do some damage. Also, just having Farah stand there and not even attempt to speed this up. Do something! You have a bow! Shoot the bastard in the head! The final boss is mostly just okay. More or less, just fight it the way you've been throughout the game and you'll get through. Shame that combat, a pretty big part of this game, has so many problems with it. Again, it's not terrible by any means, but in my opinion, it's easily the biggest drawback of this otherwise fantastic game. Sands of Time does have some rough edges looking back, but I honestly love this game way too much to let any of that kill my enjoyment. The engaging story, captivating world, gorgeous presentation, great level design, and fun gameplay all hold this game up, flaws, nitpicks, and all. As for where I'd rank this game compared to the others, that's a subject for when I go over the sequels, but as for whether I'd recommend this game, hell yeah, pick it up. The game's about $10 online, which I'd say is pretty worth it for a game around 6 to 7 hours long. It isn't that technically demanding of a game, so I imagine pretty much any modern PC can run it no problem. Maybe unless it's literally a toaster powered by a potato, but even then, I'd recommend going with any version that you have the ability to play. Just, you know, avoid the PS3 version like I avoid roller coasters that go upside down. Those godforsaken things make me shit myself. And I believe that is my 2 cents on this game. Join me next time when I take a look at the sequel, Warrior Within. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching.